Freshman Congresswoman Katie Porter held a town hall today in her California district the day after Robert Mueller finally spoke.
This has been a real turning point. A lot of you saw me on the campaign trail over and over and over again. You didn't hear me ever talk about impeachment. It's not why I went to Washington. I went to Washington to work on health care prices. I went to Washington to work on the costs of child care. I went to Washington to work on consumer protection and affordable housing. But I will not shirk my duty if the time comes, and the time is nigh.
You met Congresswoman Katie Porter on this program as soon as she began asking questions in House hearings, relying on her experience as a lawyer and a law professor trained at Harvard Law School by, among others, then Professor Elizabeth Warren. Professor Katie Porter's specialty is consumer law, and you have seen her using that expertise in questioning witnesses, sharply questioning witnesses like J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon and Donald Trump's Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson. When Congresswoman Porter was asked today what's her favorite thing about being a member of Congress, she said this.
Well, I should be honest. I like committee. I like asking my questions. I would say that I like that. Although people ask, I do get very nervous. And part of it is, in the first couple times I wasn't as nervous, but also nobody knew what hit them. So I have the advantage of surprise. Now when it's my turn, the witness just looks like they're going to puke.
Joining us now is Representative Katie Porter, a freshman Democrat from California and a member of the Financial Services Committee. Congresswoman Porter, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. And so the day after Robert Mueller spoke is sounding, when I listen to you, like a turning point of sorts in Congress and possibly a turning point for you. What is your view of the impeachment process tonight?
I think that what Director Mueller said, what Robert Mueller said, is very consistent with the report. So I didn't hear him say anything new. I think his speaking has helped reiterate to those who haven't had the opportunity to read the report and study its conclusions as I have. But what he said is exactly what he's been saying, which is that there's substantial evidence that the president obstructed justice. And he goes through, he analyzes 14 instances in the report, and in at least 4 of them, he says there's substantial evidence that there was obstruction. So I appreciate him, his consistency, his professionalism, and his ability to continue to focus on his findings.
You're representing a formerly Republican district, possibly still Republican district. The last 50 years it's been a Republican district. Does that inhibit your thinking and your public statements about impeachment?
It does not. This is an issue about what we owe the American people. And I don't care who you vote for or what party you're registered in. You're owed a government that follows the law. You're owed a president who respects our Constitution, who respects the checks and balances in our democracy. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I hope you're looking with great care at what this president has done and what he has failed to do, most recently refusing to comply with congressional subpoenas.
Congressman Amash, the only Republican member of Congress who supports impeachment, had a town hall the other day. We're going to actually show some of it later in this hour. And it was all about impeachment. What about your town hall today? How much of it was about impeachment? What was the #1 issue?
So the #1 issue was definitely health care and a number of variety of concerns about health care, not just prescription drug pricing, which of course we've been talking a lot about, also access to home health care services, mental health, a number of issues relating to health care. That continues to be the #1 issue that I get asked about. But impeachment did come up, and I would say there's been a real change since the Mueller report was published. Before that, I literally never got asked about it, or extremely rarely. Now I get asked about it almost every day. People stop me in the grocery store. They stop me as I'm going about my daily business in the coffee shop, and they want to know what I'm going to do about the president's refusal to obey the law.
And what do you tell them?
I tell them that Congress is a deliberative body, and this is by design. Congress is supposed to work slowly, and it's supposed to work in conjunction with each other. It's not the job of any one Congress member to impeach the president. It's the job of the entire body of Congress. So I am continuing to talk to my colleagues. This morning, I got a phone call from one of my congressional colleagues, a fellow freshman, this morning at 7:15, and I thought to myself, I can't believe this colleague is calling me so early in the morning, 7:15. And when I wrote that back to him, the colleague pointed out that I had texted him first. And so obviously we're up first thing in the morning. This is the first thing on my mind every day. But this is important that we have these conversations with each other and also with our constituents. It is really important because this is not about, like I said, this is not about Democratic leadership. This is not about what we owe Speaker Pelosi or what we owe any of each other as Democrats. This is about what we owe every single American to preserve our democracy for generations to come.
When I was working in the Senate, I saw two kinds of discussions among colleagues. One, highly politically pressurized. You've really got to get in line. This is what the party's doing. And another kind of discussion, which was more along the lines of soul searching, more along the lines of members trying and allowing that each other would find their own way to an answer of how they were going to vote, usually on the more momentous things, actually. And I'm wondering how this discussion about impeachment is working within the Democrats and the House of Representatives now.
It's definitely the second kind of conversation. I've had a number of colleagues contact me. I've reached out to some of my colleagues. We're sharing our thoughts and our ideas. We're sharing what we're hearing from our constituents around the country during this recess week, district work period. And so I think we're going to come back to D.C. and have the benefit of having talked with our constituents, having listened to them, having talked with them about what's going on in Washington and getting their thoughts about what to do. This is definitely a situation where the Speaker is making the opportunity for each one of us, particularly those of us who are freshmen, to go into our communities and engage in conversation about how they want us to move forward in carrying out our responsibility.
Congresswoman Katie Porter, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.